Testing. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alamin. Wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya'i wal mursalin Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Alhamdulillah, my dear respected viewers. We begin by praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for this opportunity for us to continue in our lessons in Aqaid of Imam Nasafi. And we pray that Allah bless this lesson and make it a reason where our sins are forgiven, our prayers are answered, inshallah ta'ala. And may Allah bless us with iman and taqwa, and bless us with protection and from all difficulties, trials and tribulations in dunya and akhirah. And husnul khatima, ameen, ya rabbal alameen. So in our last lesson, in the lesson, we were speaking about the negating any attributes. Negating attributes, and basically we mentioned about the impossibilities, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not like them. So we mentioned as what Imam Nasafi spoke about the impossibility of Allah taking out space and or being in a place, and likewise Allah is not binded by az-zaman, la yahtawihi az-zaman. Likewise la yumathiluhu shay. This is what we covered in our last lesson. So let us go back to our book. So we were at this part where Imam Nasafi is saying, wala yushbihuhu shay'un. Nothing is like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We mentioned in our last lesson also, there are certain words that we ascribe to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we also use to ourselves. So this is where Imam Taftazani mentioned that there is a difference when we say that Allah has knowledge, or Allah has the attribute of knowledge, and then we say human beings have knowledge. So it doesn't mean that we use the same word. It doesn't mean that they are the same. So here the reality of the difference is the difference in its realities, not whether this particular word carries the same as it carries the same word. It doesn't mean that they carry the same meaning. So this is basically what he is saying. So he is saying that nothing is like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at all. Nothing is like Allah at all. And when it comes to the words that we use similarly to ourselves, we have to understand the difference of ascribing these words to ourselves and ascribing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So for example, when we mention, for example, Allah possess knowledge, what we meant is that this knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is knowledge that is pre-eternal, knowledge that is azali, that encompasses all information. Allah knows everything. So the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not created, whereas our knowledge is created by Allah. Our knowledge is an accident. Al-Arab. This is where Imam Sabuni, he mentioned here, qala fil bidayah, which we will inshallah we will read and to what they call it, to see. The book al-bidayah here is not bidayah to hidayah. Yeah, the book al-bidayah is by al-Imam as-Sabuni. Al-Imam as-Sabuni. It is translated, and somebody give me, I just remembered, somebody give me a copy. Here it is. The Zaytuna translated this. This is a book by Imam as-Sabuni. So this is the translation. An introduction to Islamic to Islamic theology. So the book is Al-Bidayah fi Usuluddin by Al-Imam Sabuni, translation by Faraz Khan. So mashallah, it is good in the translation. I didn't manage to read everything, but the way I look at it, mashallah, the translation is good. So you might want to get this book, but again, this is another level. It's quite difficult, and it is the Maturidi school when it comes into Aqidah. So this is a particular scholar in the Maturidi school. So he mentioned قال في البداية البداية في أصول الدين by Al-Imam As-Sabuni. So he say إن العلم منا موجود. So now when he speaks, he's saying that al-ilm, knowledge, when we ascribe this knowledge to us, we say that knowledge it is in existence, but it is an accident. Wa'arad, it is an accident. So it is something that is created. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created in us any knowledge. Wa muhdath, it is contingent. Jaizul wujud, its existence is jaiz. We have understood what's the meaning of jaiz, and when we explaining this Kharida Bahiyya, after Kharida Bahiyya, we went into Aqidah Tahawiyya before that. So by now, those who are following in these lessons, at least you must have this this basic understanding of Aqidah, because the book that we are in, as I mentioned many times, this is intermediate and advanced. So at least you need to have Kharida Bahiyya. You have covered Aqidah Tahawiyya, for example, then we can benefit from Aqaid Nasafiyyah. So the explanations of Al-Imam At-Taftazani is just something that helps us to understand any further. So our lesson is not really on the commentary of Al-Imam At-Taftazani, but what I do is basically I go into the commentary of Al-Imam At-Taftazani when some things are explained in detail, so that we can understand what Al-Imam Nasafi is speaking about. So Al-Imam Sabuni in Bidayah fi Usuluddin, he's basically speaking about the difference between our knowledge and knowledge of Allah. So he said that our knowledge is an accident, muhdas, contingent, jaizul wujud, it is not wajibul wujud, whereas the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is wajib. Knowledge of Allah is wajibul wujud. Mutajaddad fi kulli zaman, it increases in what you call it from time to time. فَلَوْ أَثْبَتْنَا الْعِلْمَ صِفَةً لِلَّهِ لَكَانَ مَوْجُودًا وَصِفَةً وَقَدِيمًا وَوَاجِبَ الْوُجُودِ دَائِمًا مِنَ الْأَزَلِ إِلَى الْأَبَدِ. But when we speak about knowledge to Allah, we are saying that this is sifatullah. This is an attribute of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is qadim, it is wajib al-wujud, is what is mentioned, da'iman min al-azali ila al-abad, and it is pre-eternal, and it is wajib, meaning it doesn't accept non-existence. فَلَا يُمَاثِلُهُ علم الخلق بوجه. So the knowledge of the creation cannot resemble any knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in any case. هذا كلامه. فقد صرح بأن المماثلة عندنا إنما تثبت بالاشتراك في جميع الأوصاف حتى لو تتحقق وصف واحد انتفت المماثلة. So here again, basically the difference is in the reality. In the reality of what is the meaning of al-ilm. So when we are able to understand the difference in those realities, then we will understand that they are different, and there is no resemblance between our knowledge and the knowledge of Allah. Likewise, when we speak about our ability and the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and so on and so forth. So now we will go on. So we will not read what you call it, this what is mentioned after this. Basically it is just an extension of what we are saying. He is giving some examples. We will straight away we will go into the next part where Al-Imam An-Nasafi mentioned وَلَا يَخْرُجُ عَنْ عِلْمِهِ وَقدرته شَيْءٌ. This is what I posted in the what you call it, in the Facebook and also YouTube, the translation of this. So Al-Imam An-Nasafi is saying that nothing la yakhruju an ilmihi, nothing is outside in his knowledge and power. What is the meaning? Meaning everything is known by Allah. The knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala encompasses everything. So nothing is not known by Allah. It is impossible. When it comes into the power also, it is the same thing. Nothing exists outside the power of Allah, meaning everything come into existence by the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yani Allah created everything into existence. There is nothing and He can bring itself into existence, or there is nothing that can create another thing. Everything is a creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is basically what He is saying. And it is important for us students of knowledge that we understand the definition of each of the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So for example, if I ask you what is the definition of al-ilm, then you should know it is a sifatun azaliyatun yankashifu biha jami'ul mawjudati wal ma'dumat inkishafan la yahtamilun naqid. This is the definition of knowledge. It is a pre-eternal attribute that encompasses everything that is in existence and not in existence. It encompasses every rational laws, meaning everything that is wajib, or everything that is jaiz, or even anything that are impossible. Meaning Allah knows the things that are impossible, and He knows the possible things, and He knows the necessary things. So the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala encompasses all the factions of rational knowledge, ahkam al-aql. So nothing it can be hidden from the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is the meaning of the definition when we say yankashifu biha jami'ul mawjudati wal ma'dumat inkishafan la yahtamilun naqid. So it is an encompassing of everything, and there is no contradiction, meaning that it is impossible that something happens and Allah did not know. So everything that is known by Allah will happen. Everything that is known by Allah that will happen will happen. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He knows that something is going to happen. So it is impossible that thing does not happen against the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is what we meant by inkishafan la yahtamilun naqid. So we have to go back into our definitions to have a profound understanding on the meaning of these attributes. When it comes into the qudra, we say qudra is different. Qudra of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sifatun azaliyatun yata'atta biha ijadu mumkinin wa i'damuhu ala wafqil irada. This is the definition. So it is an attribute, a pre-eternal attribute that by it ijadu mumkin, the creation of the possibilities, the possible things, and what you call it, making them come into existence. So qudra of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is about creating and not creating, or making things becomes non-existent. So it is about bringing something into existence and bringing something from non-existence, from existence to non-existence. The meaning of ijad and i'dam. Ijad is to bring something from non-existence to existence. I'dam is something that brings something from existence to non-existence. So this is only related to the mumkin, because the mumkin or the jaizul wujud, this is the thing that accepts any existence and non-existence. So the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not related to the necessary, to the wajib, nor it is related to the mustahil. It is only related to the mumkinat. So that is why in the definition of qudra we say yata'atta biha ijadu mumkinin. Ijadu mumkin wa i'damuhu. I'damuhu dhamir goes back to mumkin. Ala wafqil irada, based on His will, what Allah wants. Everything happens by the irada of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants something to happen, He brought it into existence. So now when Al-Imam Taftazani mentioned after that, لِأَنَّ الْجَهْلَ بِالْبَعْضِ وَالْعَجْزَ عَنِ الْبَعْضِ نَقْصٌ. He said that it is impossible for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to possess ignorance. Even ignorance with something. بالبعض. Just like the philosophers, as after this we mentioned about the philosophers, because he is basically rebutting the philosophers. The philosophers, and he's saying that God has knowledge, but His knowledge is limited. And limited into what? He only knows the universals, but He does not know the particulars. God only knows the universal, but does not know the particulars. This is the viewpoint of the philosophers. Of course, this kind of ideology or understanding brings apostasy in Islam. That's why Imam Ghazali, one of the things that he mentioned that the philosophers has done an act of apostasy is when they claim that God only know the universals and he does not know the particulars. So now Imam Taftazani is rebutting the philosophers in this aspect. So he's saying that to be ignorant on even something, not necessarily many things, but even a particular thing, and to say that God does not know something, it is a shortcoming, naqs, وافتقار إلى مخصص, and it is impossible why to say that God do not know a particular thing. So when you say God do not know a particular thing, meaning his knowledge is not encompassing. So if his knowledge is not encompassing, meaning he possesses ignorance on that particular thing. So he is in need of something else to tell him about that particular thing. So this is what he said, وافتقار إلى مخصص, something else that will inform him, and this is impossible to say that God do not know, that he is ignorant, and you need something else to inform him about the thing that he do not know. All this brings about that God is contingent and cannot be pre-eternal, and in terms of his knowledge, the knowledge cannot be pre-eternal, and this is impossible. So he say مع أن النصوص القطعية, so we have the النصوص القطعية, we have verses of the Quran which is mutawatir in its dalala, in its signification, and then we also have the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and it speaks about the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. ناطقة بعموم العلم وشمول القدرة. So the knowledge is umum, meaning knowledge of Allah is it encompasses everything. وشمول القدرة, the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is related to everything. فهو سبحانه, so he said Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala بكل شيء عليم وعلى كل شيء قدير. So Allah is all-knowing and all-powerful. So I hope it is clear, inshallah. Then he speaks about the Falasifa, as what we mentioned. Before we speak about this, earlier I mentioned that the philosophers, they say that God only know the universals, but he does not know the particular. Here Imam Taftazani is saying, La kama yaz'umul falasifa. It is not like any of the philosophers are saying. Annahu la ya'lamul juz'iyat, that God do not know al-juz'iyat. Al-juz'iyat meaning particulars. Wala yaqdiru ala akthari min wahid. And he does not have the ability to do some particular things. So this is the viewpoint of the philosophers, of course. And then we have another sect, that he mentioned والدهرية. والدهرية, he mentioned أنه تعالى لا يعلم ذاته. This is also as worse as what the philosophers are saying, that Allah do not possess any knowledge on himself. Nadam is one of the leaders of the Mu'tazila. This name of a person, not Nizam. Nadam. It is a name of one of the leaders of the Mu'tazila. The Mu'tazila, they believe that human beings can make out what is good and what is bad by their intellectual capacity. This is the viewpoint of the Mu'tazila. And they believe that bad things are a creation of human beings and not a creation of Allah. Meaning that when a person do something bad, this action of doing any bad, is it a creation of human beings and a creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So the Mu'tazila say it is a creation of human beings, because the Mu'tazila, they believe in quwwatul muda'. And this last time we in Aqaid Nasafiyyah-on we spoke about the understanding of the Mu'tazila when it comes to al-kasb, when it comes to the actions of human beings. They say that Allah embedded this embedded power within any human beings, that by that embedded power human beings can do whatever he wants. So he is the one who does any bad and good, everything, and he comes from his own actions and by that power. So when they are saying that, they are saying that it is impossible for Allah to create something that is bad, because something that is bad is a creation of human beings and themselves. So this is basically what they are saying. They say ala annahu la yaqdiru ala khalq al-jahl wal qubh. Why? Because al-jahl and ignorance and qubh, something that is bad, he said that Allah do not have the ability any to bring that any into existence, because that thing any is a creation of human beings. So it is impossible that we associate Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to the creation any of bad things. You know, nowadays and we have any a lot of Muslims any asking any, for example, how about any when a person and he does sin, does it mean any that his creation, his actions and is a creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? I get these questions any many a times. So even any the Mu'tazila any they are not around today. I mean, you don't have any people claiming themselves I am a Mu'tazili, for example. But the ideology of the Mu'tazila is no doubt any present, still present until today. If a person is asking any why any are we still speaking any about a sect any that lived for hundreds of years any ago, the reason any is that even though they are not around any as a sect any within themselves, but their ideologies any are still present. So there are Muslims any who believe that actions any of bad actions, actions, sinful acts, are a creation of human beings any themselves, and this is not correct. The Ahlul Sunnah any wal Jama'ah any mention everything is a creation of Allah, regardless any whether it is something that is good or something that is bad. But human beings are responsible any for those actions any, because those actions is a reflection any of his intention. Tamam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows any your intention, and Allah create any the actions when you intend any to perform those actions, so you are accountable any for that actions. But that actions any are all creations any of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is what any we mentioned. So the Mu'tazila differ with us any in this, and he mentioned that Allah cannot create something that is bad, an action that is bad, or cannot create any ignorance, because all these are the creations any of human beings. And Balkhi said, Balkhi is also one of the Imams any of the Mu'tazila. Again, and it is they all is any basically any Mu'tazila, and he mentioned about the same thing. No need any for me any to expand any a lot any on these things. Ala kulli hal. So he said, ala annahu la yaqdiru ala misli maqduril abd. He said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not create what the human beings any do. Yani for example, human beings any when they do a particular action, when we say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala do the same action, they are not the same. They are not any the same. Any meaning? You see, the Mu'tazila, as what we mentioned, they say that human beings create his own action. For example, if you ask a Mu'tazila, now any I'm raising any this cup, I'm making any this cup any moving. Tamam? So I'm able any to do it. The Mu'tazila any will tell you that it is because any of the embedded any power that you are able any to create any this action any of bringing this cup up. Tamam? And if you ask them the question, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala do any the create any the same thing, any meaning make any this cup any go up, is it possible? They say it's possible, but they say that it is not the same. It is not any the same. So meaning the creation of human beings of this action and the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala of the action, and if Allah would create any action in human beings, they cannot any be similar. This is what he is saying. Wa'amatul mu'tazila annahu la yaqdiru ala nafsi maqduril abd. So this is the viewpoint any of the general any scholars any of the Mu'tazila. So even though any they say, for example, that human beings can do a particular action, that human beings create any their own action, but that action any differs any from the creation any of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because they themselves any mention that the actions any of human beings are there from their own creations, any from the creations of human beings. I hope any I'm not any making things any difficult, but ala kulli hal, and do not worry any about this. This basically our difference with the Mu'tazila. This is the thing about Imam Taftazani, and he brings any forth any what you call it, some any of these differences, and to tell us any that the knowledge any of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, power of Allah encompass any everything, not like what the Mu'tazila is saying, not like what the Dahriya is saying, not like what the philosophers any is saying. So the Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah yani when speaks any about the attributes any of Allah, so we have what you call it, a certain any understanding which is different any from the other sects. Tayyib. Now any we go on yani to the next one. So we are entering the next part, the author mentioned walahu sifatun. These are the words of al-Imam Nasafi. So by now you should know that whenever we have these brackets, it is the words of who? The words of al-Imam an-Nasafi. So he said Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has attributes. Allah has attributes. What is the meaning of sifa? This is the first thing we have to understand. When we say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has sifat, what is the meaning of sifa? The meaning of sifa, when we say an attribute, it means something that an attribute which the mind cannot understand its reality. This is the first thing we have to understand. So whenever we say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is all knowledge, is all knowing, that he possesses the attribute of knowledge, we must understand that this knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is his attribute, is something that our mind cannot understand its reality. It is impossible that human beings with our limited minds, our limited intellectual capacity, it is impossible that we are able to understand the reality of the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is what we meant by the word sifa. So it is an attribute that subsists within his entity when it comes to sifat ma'ani, and it is impossible for us to understand its reality. So when we learn aqidah or tawheed, we are learning the laws. We are learning the laws of the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We are not learning the realities, because nobody understands Allah except Allah. Nobody understands the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So our understanding has always be limitation, but we are learning about the laws of these attributes. Tamam. So let us look at what al-Imam at-Taftazani is saying before we move on. So he said walamma sabata annahu alimun hayyun qadirun ila dhalika. So he said that walima sabata annahu alimun hayyun qadirun. So he's saying that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has all these attributes, the attributes of knowledge, of al-haya, the attributes of al-qudra. So again, what is important for us is to understand the definitions. So when you study Aqaid Nasafiyyah, al-Imam Nasafi don't speak about definitions. Likewise, when you study Aqaid Bahiyya, there is no definitions in the matan. So you have to memorize those definitions from the commentaries. Last time I gave out the notes on the definitions of all these commentaries. طيب. The next part, Al-Imam Taftazani is speaking about the Mu'tazila. Our difference with the Mu'tazila. So let me just cover a part of this. He said وَمَعْلُومٌ أَنَّ كُلًّا مِنْ ذَلِكَ يَدُلُّ عَلَى مَعْنًى زَائِدٍ عَلى مَفْهُومِ الْوَاجِبِ. So now Al-Imam Taftazani is going to explain what is sifat al-ma'ani. So here we are entering into sifat al-ma'ani. Last time when we speak about sifat, we mentioned that the attributes of Allah are divided into four parts. Number one is sifat nafsiyah, that is wujud, the existence. And then we have salbiyah, we have the five, that is al-qidam wal-baqa' mukhalafatu lil-hawadis, qiyamuhu bi-nafsi wal-wahdaniyah. And then we have sab'atun sifat al-ma'ani, the seven sifat al-ma'ani. So we have al-haya, qudratun, iradatun, ilm, sama' wal-basar, wal-kalam, and irada. And then we have sifat ma'nawiyah. So kaunuhu mutakalliman, kaunuhu aliman, kaunuhu muridan, qadiran. All these are sifat al-ma'nawiyah. And last time when we mentioned that sifat ma'nawiyah, they are basically derived from sifat al-ma'ani. Sifat ma'nawiyah is a derivation of sifat al-ma'ani. So now we have to understand what is sifat al-ma'ani. What is sifat al-ma'ani? What is the difference between sifat al-ma'ani and sifat salbiyah? Sifat salbiyah, we say it is sifat adamiyah. What is adamiyah? Because when we speak about salbiyah, we are negating the impossibilities. For example, when we say Allah what you call it, and the attribute of al-qidam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has the attribute of al-qidam. What is the meaning of al-qidam? Al-qidam salbul awwaliyah, yani negating beginningness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We say Allah has no beginning. Allah has no beginning. So we are negating it. So the thing that is negated is not in existence. So beginningness is not related to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So whenever we speak about salbiya, we are speaking about negating the impossibilities. But when we speak about ma'ani, we are speaking about attributes that subsist in his entity. That is, that subsists in his entity that is not the same as his entity. This is where Al-Imam Taftazani is coming. So let us see what he's saying. He said, وَمَعْلُومٌ, and it is known, أَنَّ كُلًّا مِنْ ذَلِكَ, yani all of the attributes, and he's referring to the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, yani sifat al-ma'ani. He gave some examples, علم, haya, قدرة. We have kalam, sama' wal basar, and what you call it? These are the 7, and sifat al-ma'ani. So he said, يَدُلُّ عَلَى مَعْنًا زَائِدْ عَلَى مَفْهُومِ الْوَاجِبِ. So he said that there is what you call it, an addition to what we have understood on the necessary existence, on the necessary existence. So when we say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has these attributes, sifat al-ma'ani, so we say that these attributes is different from his entity. So this attribute subsists in his entity. Clear, inshallah? So we do not say that his attributes is the same as the entity, nor we say they are separated from it. This is a bit something that you need to digest, something that we need to digest, and we have covered this in Kharida. Last time in Kharida Bahiyya we have mentioned Al-Imam Al-Dardir, for example, one of the things that he mentioned is this. He said that the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala laysa ayna dhat, it is not the entity, wala ghayru dhat, and it is not other than his entity, meaning we cannot be speaking about the separation between the attributes and the entity. So but when we speak about the differentiation, we say his entity is different than his attributes. Naam. So he said, ala ma'nan za'id ala mafhumil wajib wa laysa al-kullu alfadhan mutaradifah. So this is basically the meaning of al-sifat al-ma'ani. So there is a difference between the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the entity of Allah. In Arabic we say az-zat wa sifat. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala zat and sifat. And then he mentioned فثبت له صفة العلم والقدرة والحياة وغير ذلك لا كما تزعم المعتزلة من أنه عالم لا علم له قادر لا قدرة له. This is again the difference between the Ahlul Sunnah and the Mu'tazila. So you will find Al-Imam Taftazani in this part of the page. He will go extensively speaking about the difference between us and the Mu'tazila, and he explained about the ideology of the Mu'tazila. The Mu'tazila is saying this is what they are saying, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has knowledge, but that knowledge is not an attribute that subsists in his entity. So again this is the difference between us and the Mu'tazila. Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, when we say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has any attributes, meaning those attributes subsist in his entity. The Mu'tazila is saying that is not the case. That is not the case. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has no sifa that is the sifa of knowledge or the sifa of qudra. That is sifa of qudra. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has none of these attributes. Ajib. If Allah does not possess knowledge as an attribute, then how does Allah knows? You say Allah knows by his entity. Allah knows by his entity, but not as an attribute that subsists. So these are, mashallah, some of the fine difference between us and them. So that is why nowadays sometimes you find people saying that the problem of the Mu'tazila is that they reject the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we have to understand what is the meaning when they reject. Are they saying that Allah doesn't have attributes at all? What they are saying is that Allah does not have attributes that subsist in His entity. But they are saying that Allah knows, Allah wills, Allah creates. But how does Allah knows? How does Allah knows? So that they are not saying that Allah has an attribute of knowledge, but they are saying that Allah knows by His entity, not by what you call it, not due to the fact that He possesses an attribute that is called knowledge. So this is the problem of the Mu'tazila. So Al-Imam Taftazani is going to speak about all these things, which I feel, what you call it, we will not speak about this. These are some very detailed matters, but inshallah ta'ala, what I'll do, I'll just summarize inshallah when we come to the next part. So basically what I did earlier is just basically I'm summarizing what they meant by them negating the attributes. So this is one of the main differences between us and the Mu'tazila. That is why we find Al-Imam An-Nasafi, he speaks about this. He mentioned that the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, first thing he mentioned azaliyah. And if you look at this page, it is related to the attributes. Lahu sifatun. Earlier he mentioned lahu sifatun, then this comes in. And this is the khabar. Lahu sifatun azaliyatun. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala possess the pre-eternal attributes. The meaning of azaliyah meaning pre-eternal. So Al-Imam Taftazani, after rebutting the Mu'tazila, saying that the Mu'tazila negate pre-eternal attributes that subsist in the entity of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then Al-Imam Taftazani mentioned la kama taz'umul karamiyah min anna lahu sifatuhum lakinnaha hadithatun listihalati qiyamil hawadisi bizatihi ta'ala. You have another second that is karamiyah that mention that Allah has attributes, but the attributes of Allah is contingent. This is another big issue. Karamiyah, a sect within Islam that says that Allah has attributes, but His attributes are contingent. So what is the difference between Karamiyah and Mu'tazila? The Mu'tazila negate the attributes, whereas Karamiyah did not negate any of the attributes, but they are saying that the attributes of Allah are contingent. So both of these are wrong. So what is important for us at this point of time, we should be clear the stand of the Ahlu Sunnati wal Jama'ah. We say that the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ma'nan za'idan. This is what Al-Imam Taftazani mentioned earlier, that it is an attribute that subsists within the entity of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we say that all of the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are pre-eternal, azaliyah. Now, about the Mu'tazila, inshallah, and we will come back there. There's the reason why I skipped, because he mentioned some details about that, but after that we find this mentioned again. Then he mentioned qa'imatun bi dhatihi. This is what I meant earlier when we speak about the viewpoint of the Ahlul Sunnah. We say Allah possess attributes and His attributes are pre-eternal. Qa'imatun bi dhatihi, that is subsists in His entity. That here is entity of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, meaning we are saying that the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is subsists within the entity of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are all pre-eternal. Likewise, the entity that is the Zat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is also pre-eternal. So if you look here again, he speak about the Mu'tazila. La kama taz'umul Mu'tazila, he said. La kama taz'umul Mu'tazila, because the Mu'tazila mentioned that the attributes of Allah does not subsist in His entity. So in that they reject the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he said daruratan kama annahu la ma'na li sifati shay illa ma yaqumu bihi. So here Al-Imam Taftazani, after he mentioned about all these differences between us and the Mu'tazila, he come to this conclusion, and this conclusion is important. So he's saying yani he's saying that it is impossible yani to say that an attribute does not any subsist any in something, and you name it any as an attribute. It is impossible. Meaning, when you say the word any attribute, when what we understand any the attribute, it must any subsist in an entity. Then only it can be the attribute any of that entity. But if you believe any in something, any for example, you believe any in an attribute, but it does not any subsist any in that entity, but it subsists in something else. So it cannot be the attribute any of that entity that you are speaking about. You see the Mu'tazilah, for example, and they say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we can say the kalam of Allah. The kalam of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What is meant any by the Mu'tazilah when they say kalam of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So he said that kalam of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not a sifa. It is not an attribute of Allah, but it is a creation. Yani Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created his kalam in what you call it, in the universe. He created in a way, he gave any to Jibril alayhi salam, that Jibril and he understood any his words and gave any to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But the kalam in this particular kalam any is not an attribute any of Allah. This is what any they're saying. So they are saying any that Allah any created any this, Allah created any his kalam, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave any to Jibril alayhi salam, and this kalam any is associated to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by saying any kalamullah, kalam any billah. But this association any is not to say that it is an attribute any of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but it is something that is ascribed into Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, from something that he himself and he has created. So this is any the viewpoint any of the Mu'tazilah. So Al-Imam Mutaftazani is saying any this is impossible. How can you say that something is a creation any of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but yet any it carries any the word sifa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when it does not subsist any in its entity? So Al-Imam Mutaftazani and he mentioned this is impossible, and then he said kama taz'umul mu'tazilatu bi annahu mutakallimun bi kalamin huwa qa'imun bi ghayrihi. This is exactly the example any I gave, because any the Mu'tazilah any said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is mutakallim, but the kalam any of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in something else, not within the entity any of Allah, but it is in something else. So Al-Imam Taftazani is saying any how can you believe in such when you are saying Allah is mutakallim, yani has any this attribute any of kalam, but any the kalam in itself and is not within the entity of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but it is in something else. Then he said lakinna muradahum nafya kaunil kalam sifatan lahu. So the Mu'tazilah is basically saying any that the kalam any of Allah is not the attribute any of Allah, so they are negating it as an attribute. La isbata kaunihi sifatan lahu ghayra qa'im bi dhatihi ta'ala. Yani some of the Mu'tazilah mentioned that Allah has the attribute of kalam, but this attribute any of kalam any is not within the entity of Allah, but is in other than the entity of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is any what you call it, the difference any between us and the Mu'tazilah. So I will not any go on any to speak any more about this. I will just skip whatever explanations any which I feel it is too any complex, and it is not any really important, because most any of these complex any things any that is mentioned by the Al-Imam Taftazani, it is not any really any important to understanding these differences, when especially when he speaks any about the differences any between us and the Mu'tazilah, the difference any between us any and the philosophers. I will try any my best any to what you call it focus any on the things any that is important when comes any to understanding the matan of Al-Imam Nasafi. So inshallah in our next lesson we will go any into this. We will explain any what is any the meaning when Al-Imam Nasafi any mentioned that the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wa hiya la huwa wa la ghayruhu. We say the attributes any of Allah is different any from his entity, and it cannot any be separated any from his entity. So we are saying any that the attributes any of Allah is not any his entity, and likewise any we do not any differentiate any between the entity of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his attributes. because of the impossibility of any form of separation between his entity and his attributes. So on this, and inshallah, we will speak about this, and inshallah, in our next lesson. So our next lesson, inshallah, you speak any more about the understanding of Ahlul Sunnah when it comes to the sifat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then we also speak about why the Mu'tazila came into that direction. Why are they negating the attributes of Allah? Why? Al-Imam Tazani will speak about this in what you call it, in the lines that you see below here. There is a reason why they do not want to say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has attributes. There is a reason, but the problem is that they are making this big mistake. They fall into something that is worse by them negating the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So inshallah we will stop here. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alamin. Allahumma salli wa sallim ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala ali Sayyidina Muhammad. Rabbana atina fid dunya hasana wa fil akhirati hasana wa qina adhaban nar. Sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alamin.